Welcome, everyone, to another edition of SCRC's Let's Talk Caregiving. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, President and CEO of Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Marta Rañón, our Executive Vice President. How are you doing today, Marta?
I'm doing great, Roberto. Nice to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Today's special guest is Eve Lefkowitz. Eve is the founder and executive director of Conversations to Remember, a nationwide nonprofit dedicated to alleviating senior loneliness and isolation through weekly intergenerational video calls with young adult college student volunteers. What began as a local initiative now serves seniors across the United States. With a background in psychology and law and extensive nonprofit business experience, Eve is committed to fostering meaningful connections and building surrogate families for those in need. Welcome, Eve.
Thank you so much, Roberto. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome to our podcast. I'm so glad that we are having this conversation about really connecting seniors with others. And I love this intergenerational component. What is it that got you to start such a project?
Well, Martha, this was a family initiative that was spearheaded by my then high school son. Back in 2000, when the world shut down because of COVID, we had a loved one living in a long-term care community with dementia who we had visited and spoke to every single day. And then we could no longer go and see her in person. I started doing video calls with her. She was one of the lucky people that even at the beginning of the shutdown had a device to do a video call. And I would spend hours on the video call every day with her. At the same time, well, I should say prior to the pandemic, I have two children. One was in college at the time, one was in high school. And my high school son, Aaron, was, in addition to going all the time to see his grandmother in a long-term care community, he was also volunteering at another local long-term care community in their dementia care unit and was visiting there every week with a friend. When COVID came and shut everything down, he was no longer allowed to go there. He saw how we were video calling with my mother-in-law all the time and said, hey, I bet the people who I used to visit every week would enjoy that too. And he contacted the community where he had volunteered and asked them if he could do a video call. And they set him up with one of the residents who he had known a little bit through his in-person volunteering. And he and his friend who had been doing the weekly visits at the community started doing a weekly video call. They very much enjoyed it and told their friends. All of their friends wanted to do it too. So my son contacted the community and asked, can we do it with somebody else also? And he stayed on the first call, and he also joined a second weekly call with another resident there. And each of the calls had different of his friends. And he found them meaningful, and he could tell that the seniors he was talking to, even though they each had dementia, really found it meaningful. So he came to my husband and myself and said, hey, I'm helping two people, but there are so many more people who would appreciate this. And Conversations to Remember was born. So my entire family got on board at that point, and we created the nonprofit, got all of our ducks in a row, and it is amazing how quickly it became it grew from local to national.
What an amazing story. Of course, COVID really magnified how isolated people are. And there's been programs, since then, such as yours, where they call in and check on seniors and things of that nature. Even Meals on Wheels type programs where they do home deliveries, and they actually train their volunteers to check in and say hello. And that's sometimes all the social interaction that people get when they're still independent in their homes, living by themselves. And the interesting thing is, since COVID, there's been more and more studies and research related to loneliness and older adults. And I do know that our caregivers that we work with, even though they're at home, and most of the time, caregivers are on their own. I mean, they do sometimes have some respite. They do sometimes have some relief from other family members, but they're pretty much isolated. And 17% of the caregivers that we work with have significant scores of loneliness and isolation. And they equivalent that to smoking like 20 cigarettes a day. I mean, that's how terrible being lonely and being isolated and going through depression because of those types of things, because of your responsibilities as a caregiver, can be on an individual.
Roberto, it's interesting that you say that, because that is completely true. And I'm actually surprised to hear that the 17% number of your caregivers being lonely, because I actually would have expected that particular number to be higher, because it is very isolating when you are in the trenches caring for one individual. And it's more than just a full-time job.
I really like the fact that you are focusing, Eve, through your nonprofit on the seniors. And it's really commendable of your son, your family, to really take this on. It's such a huge endeavor, but so powerful and so impactful, I believe, for the person that is receiving that connection, for the community as well. I do like the idea that it's not just the seniors, right? We work with the family caregivers, and many times what we find is the family caregivers are also very isolated, because caregiving is isolating. And unless you understand exactly what the caregiver is going through, there tends to be a kind of a separation between those who are caregivers and those who are not. Speaking from personal experience, I remember when I was caring for my great aunt and I was a caregiver, I was very much full on and very hands on with her care. And at that time, I was in my 20s, mid 20s, kind of, mid to late 20s. And so a lot of my friends were having their small children and having parties for their children. And here I am with my aunt in her 90s, right, with dementia, caring for her. And I remember that a lot of the get togethers, I couldn't take her. She had dementia and it was going to be just too much for her. So I started kind of opting out of these invitations. Well, guess what happened? I started getting less and less invited to these activities. And so then I felt isolated. I felt like, wait, what about me? I want to hang out with you too. And I had to make a choice because I was her primary caregiver, but it was very isolating. And I remember it took a lot for me to understand. As a matter of fact, I went through the counseling program at SCRC, because one of the really just impactful events of my life was this change in the friendships that I had because of the fact that I was a full-time caregiver. So I really like that. Yes, you are focusing on that senior, but I also want to make sure we don't forget about the caregivers who might also be feeling isolated.
Well, one of the things we hear all the time, Martha, from the caregivers is that this is often like a respite for them. They need to turn on the device. They need to be available to troubleshoot if their loved one hits the mute button and doesn't know what they did, or disconnected and didn't mean to do it. But other than that, it's an hour off. And we hear from the caregivers a couple of things. Some of them just will watch the call, listen to the call, and feel this wonderful, happy feeling of watching their loved one in the exchange with these young adults and seeing the change to their loved one. Some of them have told us things like, well, my mother, here's one particular example. We had somebody who changed the time of their call to coincide with lunchtime because their mother didn't want to eat, and her whole personality would change when she got on the video call with the young adults. And they found that she was willing to take some bites of food during the call, something the students are not allowed to do, but obviously the senior can. And they found that she was eating better because of these calls.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were saying that, Eve, that I remember a volunteer talking to the caregiver. The caregiver was the husband, and he took care of his wife, who had pretty advanced dementia, but she was still at home with him. And but the but the individual with dementia, with Alzheimer's, she was always around her husband, and so they started to bump heads. She would frustrate him, he would get frustrated with her, and so when the volunteer would go over and give him some respite, the individual with dementia would act completely different, like you're talking about. All of a sudden the girls were there, or it was like if it was her girlfriend, and she was a lot younger, of course, than her. But she would reminisce, and then they would talk about going out as if they were going to go out somewhere, but they weren't. And they would go into the closet and look at dresses, and almost like play we're going to go play dress up and things of that nature. But it was very enjoyable. And for that hour or so, they engaged by themselves, and it gave the husband that respite, like you're talking about. It gave him that relief that somebody was there having conversations and getting her all animated and engaged and putting her in a really good mood. So I'm glad to see that that's the type of interactions you're experiencing with your program.
I chuckled when you were recounting that, because we hear things like my girls, or we have boys, young men and young women on these calls, but to the seniors, they are their kids. So we hear all the time how the senior will say, my kids are coming, I'm seeing my kids today. And they don't mean their children who grew up in their house. They mean their conversations to remember family, which is just heartwarming.
I do see that. I've talked to a couple of caregivers whose children might already be grown and out of the house, even out of the state or country. And it's very difficult to get together on a regular basis. But then when you have students like the ones that you work with, or other community individuals who participate in this kind of engagement with the seniors or even the caregivers, there is a new relationship that gets created. And sometimes it's even better than the relationship that they might have with their own family members. And they're more willing to do different things and explore different outings or conversations or engaging with other, individuals. I remember one in particular, one caregiver who I was engaging with, and this is more of on a personal level, and so not related at all to me. And so I just knew her son, and we were friends, and so I would kind of see her and maybe take her something to, a donuts or something. And so it became a regular visit of mine. And she looked forward to it. And then once I had my children, she would say, I'm going to go see my grandkids, meaning my children. We're not related. She's not my kid's grandmother. But because of that relationship that we built, we call her the grandmother, even though that's not the case. But it's because of that relationship. She was willing to have conversations with me that maybe she wasn't willing to necessarily have with her own kids. And because they're busy and they're doing other things, I just happen to be closer to her and therefore engage with her more often. So this is wonderful that there is that engagement.
It is wonderful, Martha. And there's so many different things that we hear from caregivers about what they get out of these calls. So first of all, for a caregiver who's also a senior, we offer them, if they would like, they can sign up for their own call if they're able to break away for a little bit. When I say break away, I mean not have to be hands-on with their loved one whom they're taking care of, but because they can do this anywhere. You can have these calls from your bed, and we've had many people have the calls from their beds. That's what's one of the wonderful things is you can take the call with you. We have calls that happen in the person's house. We have calls that happen in the hospital when the person had to go to the hospital. But from the caregiver perspective, they can have their own call if they'd like. Also, some of them find this is like a little time off. I hear from people all the time, caregivers all the time, that I get to make dinner every Wednesday night because my husband has his weekly call on Wednesdays at 4:00. And so I can prepare dinner, and every other day he's in my way or keeping me occupied. And that's a break for me. So they get a break. They get joy out of seeing the happiness from their loved one. And if they want, and they're a senior themselves, they could have their own call. We had one couple who the husband was doing a call for a very long time. He barely had dementia. And over the, I think, 2 years that he was on his call, his dementia progressed to the point where he could barely speak. And his wife started sitting next to him and kind of helping him have the conversations. And sadly, he passed. When he passed, his wife, who had never wanted to do her own call, wanted to do the call with those students because she had felt a bond with them because of all the joy that they had brought her husband.
That's wonderful to hear that, because I was about to say, and Martha, you can confirm, I think, with what I'm going to say, is that it's really beautiful to see this, the relationships that are built, these intergenerational relationships. Martha, you tell the story about how when you were taking care of your aunt, how your kids would actually engage with her, and they learn. I mean, they're learning. First of all, they're learning stories, but they're also learning empathy. They're learning how to listen. They're learning how to engage with older adults, and it's just such a beautiful thing to see and observe. And then it gives them some perspective growing older themselves, not to just dismiss people because they're frail or old or sick or things like that.
I totally agree, Roberto. And I exactly what I was thinking, that you, by doing this and by really keeping in mind the empathy, really create the next generation that is going to be really able to engage in like Roberto saying, and not ignore or abandon the aging adult. I think that's so wonderful. And it really does give me hope, because I do see it in my children, that because of that experience and the stories that I tell, they're more receptive to engaging with those adults, and they're more respectful, but they have that empathy and understanding that things might be a little different for them than they are on a personal level. So I'm so glad to hear that this is hopeful for the next generation.
One of the biggest surprises to me when we started this organization and this service was how many young adults wanted to do this. It is very heartwarming when you hear about this generation. You don't usually hear this side of it. And we hear from the students who are on these calls. Some of them have changed their career paths to go into something related to seniors. And that is an amazing thing in and of itself.
Yeah, and I mean, again, those are some wonderful experiences. And I think before we wrap up, because we're running out of time here, I will say that, growing up myself, we grew up in a big family, and the grandparents were always around, grandmothers were always around, the mothers were with the kids, and we were always together and telling stories and laughing and engaging with one another. And there was grandkids, mothers, and grandmas and grandfathers. So you had that experience, and it was a very common way of interacting with each other almost every weekend. So it was really a fun time. And I think that your program brings those opportunities, because sometimes, especially nowadays, people maybe don't gather as much as they used to. Maybe the families are distant, living in different states or different counties and so forth. So the opportunities to grow up with your grandparents, to grow up seeing older adults and interacting, is not as common as I think as it used to be. So what a wonderful opportunity through your program to get have that give people that opportunity, young kids that opportunity to get engaged and learn how to interact, and like you said, to even change careers. Well, any final thoughts?
One thing I want to mention: it is always scary when older adults have people contacting them, and there's so much fraud out there and so many scams out there. And one of the things that we make sure of is the safety and security for the seniors on these calls. We never allow a student alone on the calls. We put 2 to 3 students on the call, and there's never a one-on-one. So that's a safety factor for everyone. The students don't know where the senior lives, so they can't do anything that they shouldn't be doing. They don't know how to contact them. They can't scam them. That is one of the wonderful parts about being able to do this virtual thing.
Once again, I think that that's a great program, Conversations to Remember. Love that program. Um, and unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. To hear more of our podcasts, follow us on your favorite podcasting platforms or visit our website at scrc.care. I want to thank Martha for co-hosting another important discussion, Eve Lefkowitz for joining us today, and our audience for tuning in. If you're providing support to a loved one, you don't have to do this alone. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. To connect to our programs and services, visit our website at scrc.care or call us at 1-800-827-1008. If you live outside of San Diego and Imperial counties, visit caregivercalifornia.org to find the Caregiver Resource Center nearest you. To support our efforts and make a tax-deductible donation, please go to scrc.care and click on the Donate tab. And remember, SCRC is here for you, caring for those who care for others.